Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. My name is Gauri Kundalia. Joe Biden and Xi Jinping held a 3-hour-long virtual meeting, their first in Biden's term, and amid high tensions. Joe Biden warned Xi over his actions in Taiwan, in Tibet, in Hong Kong, as well as in Xinjiang. He also expressed his commitment in ensuring a peaceful Indo-Pacific. On the other hand, Xi Jinping also warned Biden, saying that he was fighting with fire when it came to Taiwan. This showed that Biden took a strong stand on China while also appealing that the two countries should avoid a conflict in the future. Joining us to decode this is a panel of guests. We have with us Ambassador Deepak Vora, former diplomat. Also with us on the broadcast, Professor Swaran Singh. He's a foreign policy expert. Also with us is Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli, a China and foreign policy expert. And Professor Nalapat is also on the broadcast with us. He's the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. Professor Nalapat, if I could begin with you, sir, would you say that Biden was strong in his words when he called out Xi Jinping for what he's been doing in Tibet, in Taiwan and in Hong Kong?
Well, Biden had experts such as Rosenberg along with him. And I think they were there basically to interpret Xi's words. Now, when you listen to the words spoken by Chinese leaders and you interpret them according to words spoken by, for example, Indian or US leaders, you're going to make very severe mistakes. So those who rely on their words, on their statements, on their records, may not be able to decipher their intent and motives. So the reality is what she was saying was very clear. Keep off if we do anything to Taiwan. Any kinetic attack on an island or whatever, you keep off. It's not your business. Secondly, we have full sovereignty. What does that mean? It means that any territory that they regard as belonging to the PRC, it's their sovereign territory and they can do whatever they like there. And the US better not interfere because it's a red line for China, sovereignty. Now this is basically a fluctuating sovereignty. It goes here and there and here. And this is frankly a recipe for problems. Certainly they don't acknowledge sovereignty over many parts of India, even after basically taking over significant parts of India. They don't acknowledge sovereignty of Taiwan, when Taiwan has really not been under Chinese control. I mean, they were under KMT control. By that time, KMT has been booted out of China. And they don't acknowledge anything in the South China Sea or the East China Sea. It belongs to China, according to them. They have the sovereign rights there. And anybody who comes in or goes out, well, you better do what we like or we can block you. And you, the United States, remember, we treasure our quote-unquote sovereignty. Now, very frankly, judging by let me tell you, on Chinese official media, judging by the remarks of Chinese official media, interpreting the words sovereignty, interpreting the words domestic, it's not difficult for somebody, at least two people who are in the Biden team to decipher that. And I'm sure they were talked to President Biden. President Biden himself, frankly, was, as usual with Joe Biden, very emollient, very conciliatory. I mean, extremely, if I may say so, he didn't react to any of these cues, which probably means that the poor man has not understood the real meaning of any of these words. I would say that is the point. This is a man who just ran out of Afghanistan. This is a man, frankly, who has never shown an appetite for any kind of kinetic action. He was bitterly opposed to the raid that killed bin Laden. The only person in that situation room opposed to the raid was Vice President Joe Biden. So the Chinese will be hoping that if they get into a kinetic situation over the Himalayas, South China Sea, East China Sea, well, Biden's instincts will kick in, and as president, he will do a second Afghanistan.
Okay, interesting. Ambassador Vora, how do you look at Xi Jinping's warning, if I can use that word, to Joe Biden, saying they're playing with fire as far as Taiwan is concerned?
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure and an honor to be with you on NewsX, listen to you, learn from you, from Professor Nalapat. I love fluctuating sovereignty with Professor Shrikant Kondapalli and Professor Swaran Singh. Always a pleasure. This, of course, as you've just pointed out, was their third virtual interaction. The first one, which was an e-conversation. Different from the previous ones in tone, but the content is the same. The lack of trust is obvious. Ma'am, I remind you that in February this year, the panelists will remember that they had a conversation, and then Joe Biden accused China of a million things: unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer, etc., etc., Hong Kong, Taiwan, obfuscation over the virus, etc., etc. And then he also said that this character Xi Jinping doesn't have a democratic bone in his body. So what has changed between February of 2021 and November of 2021? If anything, China is more belligerent and aggressive. If anything, America is angry and divided over the decision to dump Afghanistan. Some issues that America is concerned about are not matters that threaten American security. Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, Taiwan, but then a good uncle is concerned about everything. China, on the other hand, feels that these subjects are vital to its nationhood. Ma'am, we are trained to look behind the theatrics. 2,400 years ago, a fellow called Chanakya had said, there's no friendship without self-interest. What is the self-interest of China and the USA today? The USA wants the world to know we are back. We are standing tall, Afghanistan notwithstanding. We are the global numero uno. We have been, we would like to be. China turns around and says, no way, we are now your equal. Even on an issue as globally significant as climate change, China says, don't expect negotiations to remain an oasis in a desert of overall relation, which means we won't talk to you on climate change unless you behave yourself and consider that we are your equal. What is the world threatened by today? China is not exporting communism as it used to when I was a student. Professor Swaran Singh, you remember, we used to be on the street saying, Chairman Mao Zindabad. All kinds of fellows used to say that many, many years ago. Nobody says Chairman Ping Pong Zindabad these days. What is of concern is the manipulation of the system. Nobody wants a Sinocentric world except China. This is the dilemma that faces the Americans. If I'm number one, there can be no other number one. And China's dilemma is, I have no influence in the world till the world accepts me as number one. So when there is a clash of perceptions, ma'am, there'll be lots of theatrics, there'll be lots of smart and smooth conversations, but the net result will be -0. And you'll see this, ma'am.
Okay. Dr. Kondapalli, do you agree with that? Because these bilateral summits, when they take place, Xi Jinping is saying we're advancing global peace, is the China and US joint mission. Just shortly after, he said that there's a Cold War brewing in the region. So how do you view these bilateral talks which happen?
The talk as such is very important for strategic stability. The largest economy and the second largest economy should talk. Which is what Biden's attempt has also been. We compete with, but we reduce the conflict scenario. We enhance the cooperative measures, but let us decently fight in terms of competition. That is what his tone has been, which is what he said, US President said. But he also had the red lines, that is that allies and friends and the American national interests, which he clearly maintained in the initial steps of the dialogue. The Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, was only mentioning about non-conflict, non-conflictual, win-win cooperation and mutual, he said joint mission. Joint mission here means, the Chinese in their history have what is called a magical weapon, like the United Front. So in 1935, they clubbed up with Chiang Kai-shek, and by 1945, they grew military strength, etc. And between 45 to 49, they defeated the KMT. So this is what they are offering to the US. Let us have a united front. Let us deal in trade and other issues. You transfer us semiconductors. The Huawei $130 billion, which was banned during the Trump administration. Let us deal in high-tech areas. Let's deal in, all the areas. But when it comes to Taiwan, when it comes to South China Sea, Senkaku Islands, all these belong to us. Asia belongs to China. and you keep off. So the United Front or joint mission, as Xi Jinping mentioned, is a United Front tactic that they are proposing to the US. They did in Sunny Lands in 2013 with Obama, and they are further proposing this. Relatively, they think that United States is now a weaker power. Lee Kuan Yew, the Singaporean leader, warned the Chinese that this assessment is wrong. You're entering into a quagmire by saying that the Americans are in decline, that it would really cost China its rise if they make such calculations. Nevertheless, the Chinese assessment is that US is in decline, that they can impose their will on Asia and beyond. For example, Xi Jinping's speech in SICA summit meeting in May 2014, outside powers should withdraw, or he mentioned Asian powers should look after their own security, meaning thereby that Americans should withdraw from their bases, as they withdrew from Subic Bay and others before in 1991. So if the Americans withdraw from Asia, it is field day for China, because it's the largest economy, largest military, and now with 1,000 nuclear warheads, they can cajole everybody else in the region. So this is basically, they're offering a united front, which they did, of course, since 1972, united front under Nixon with the Chinese. But you have now a reassessment within the, it's a bipartisan reassessment in United States, which is that China rise is going to gobble up the US influence. They have in the revised long telegram, as somebody mentioned, they did mention all these, that rise of China is chipping away American influence across. And Biden mentioned about Taiwan by saying that peaceful resolution and by the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. Those are the basics that he mentioned. In addition, of course, the 3 communiques that the Americans have signed. So there is no, and today the Chinese have scrambled several aircraft, including J-10, J-11, and others across the Taiwan Straits, closer to Pangu Island. So, which means that soon after the Biden-Xi talks, they are once again in the Taiwan Straits, as we saw in early October, with nearly 200 aircraft being scrambled at that time. So we are back again with a clear, contest between U.S. and China, and in the conflict between U.S. and China, we see this. Organsky has a challenger and a defender. Organsky wrote this book on how nations rise and others fall because of the conflict, etc. So we are in the midst of this stage where a rising country and a defender is trying to defend the system, but the challenger is challenging. So we are in this stage now where the challenger, that is China, is increasingly chipping off the US influence.
Okay, interesting. Professor Swan Singh, how would you, the international media is actually reporting that there was no big breakthrough in the summit, it was rather tepid. What would the Chinese media want to project it as? What's the reporting happening within China as far as this summit is concerned?
See, you have to remember, Gauri, this was a meeting that was held on President Joe Biden's bidding for it. And this is the third interaction, but first face-to-face meeting online. And in that sense, if you look at the fact that it is on request of Joe Biden, that itself gives Chinese media enough freedom in that sense to put that strong position on the Chinese side. If you read the reporting in Global Times, for example, it looks like Xi Jinping really warned President Joe Biden in terms of not burning his hands, etc. in Taiwan. So it's a strongman kind of projection, optics that you will see in Chinese media. to begin with. But to some extent, it's also true that President Joe Biden fully understands the changing equations when it comes to what Chinese call their core interests. In this case, Taiwan would be one of those core interests. Where, if you heard recently, Joe Biden in his speech had said something which was soon rectified by White House spokesperson, fundamentally shifting policy from not defending Taiwan, as has been the policy throughout, to now deterring China instead of not inflicting some kind of a, unbearable damage on Taiwan. So that policy is definitely changing. Of course, it was repeatedly explained, it is still the strategic ambiguity that remains the policy on these issues. But right now, if you look at Joe Biden, as Professor Nalapur just mentioned earlier, after his precipitous, withdrawing from Afghanistan, plus look at the raging pandemic and of course rising inflation in the United States, his numbers are tumbling down, and therefore there is a need to address his domestic constituencies to say, what they have said. Only message that comes out of meeting is they don't want to see competition veering into a conflict. Now that's a message to say that both sides feel that mutually hurting stalemate has come to such a stage that they need to really start a new chapter. So one could say that ambitious projection from the United States is to reset the relationship to ensure post-pandemic resilience of economy and no longer continue with ratcheting up of trade technology wars with Chinese. And in that sense, to some extent, I understand that Xi Jinping also has domestic issues, repeated power shortages or property crisis, but he recently comes out as the only choice, inevitable choice in case of Chinese to continue for his third term. In that sense, he's building himself for a longer future. Very few people are expecting President Joe Biden to contest next elections. So, one could see that the balance clearly is tilting here over a period of time, and the United States is understanding that. And that is why, even if the core of policies of United States continue to be same as Donald Trump, right, but unlike very confrontationist, bilateral, personalized policy, Joe Biden is doing the same thing in terms of much more subtle and finessed manner. And as Ambassador Bora would understand, diplomacy is all about finesse. Message is being conveyed, but compare his speech in climate change summit and what he was speaking at the opening of this meeting with President Xi Jinping, complete U-turn. So setting up certain amount of stage so that future could hold some possibilities of these two largest and second largest economies really contributing to the global resurgence or global resilience in terms of economy. So first message of Joe Biden is to domestic constituencies. Second message of Joe Biden is to his friends and allies, which also must be kept in good humor in terms of trusting United States as a leader which will stand up for issues like Taiwan. So yes, lip service was paid to all these issues of human rights, of Taiwan and other issues, but I don't think were really meaning much other than setting the stage for potential opening of conversations between two sides. Chinese had promised but not still bought $200 billion worth of products from the United States. In that sense, trade continues to be increasingly one-sided. So one understands the advantages that China has in terms of leader being in command of the situation, country being in command of rising economy of what they call now 100 trillion yuan GDP, which is 16 trillion US dollars in current dollar terms. So they seem to be feeling in a bit of an intoxication of a leader going up and the country going up. I understand they have their, enemies. They have countries who don't trust Chinese. There will be many countries who don't trust Chinese. But China's deep pockets and rising, this new incarnation of rising China, as Srikanth was mentioning, the rising power versus, if you don't call it declining power, at least the status quo power in that sense. That equation clearly, no doubt, provides advantage United States. Chinese will take decades to match up with United States in terms of technology, military power. But the intoxication of a rising power is very different compared to the power which is, globally being described as declining power. So both sides understand their strengths and weaknesses in that sense. And therefore, I think only thing you will notice in this meeting is, I think, optics of this meeting to say, okay, we have come to, close a chapter of blatant contestations with each other. And we want to really talk to each other now and see what can be done in the future. And therefore, I think this at best can be seen as a first step forward which sends some positive message to both sides' domestic constituencies, but particularly to US friends and allies, including India. I suppose India will have to be very, very careful in analyzing what is happening here, because the more US and China comes closer, it could have implications for India-US relationship. The kind of rapid pace of coming closer and signing one after another foundational agreements, 2+2 dialogue starting, that happened because President Donald Trump had really very, very strong anti-China stance in his foreign policy. He was taking it very personalized, anti-China stance. And he showcased that in terms of standing with India, being, sort of repeatedly saying, I want to mediate with India-China relations, India-Pakistan relations, and so on. Now, if you quickly recall what happened after India's nuclear test in 1998,
right.
President Clinton came to Beijing and signed a joint statement that they will jointly look at South Asia's security. I'm not saying we are going that far, because there is a lot of autonomy in India-United States relationship now, with foundational agreements, defense partnerships, and others. There is enormous power of that bilateral relationship. But I am alluding to the fact that if this opening goes forward the way President Joe Biden would like it to see going, then it would have some influence, of course, on how India-United States relationship will move forward.
Okay.
But I understand that it is something which is only an opening. It may not go forward the way people are anticipating it to go forward, because there are too many differences between two sides.
Right.
They really don't see eye to eye on a dozen issues to begin with. So that's going to be a uphill task.
Okay, Professor Singh, let me pick on one of the things you mentioned, message to allies. Professor Nalapat, any messages to the Quad to take away from the summit?
Well, I'd like to very respectfully say that I disagree, frankly, with the great optimists that I'm seeing in front of me. And I think I think they should lighten their reading burden and read less about what Chinese media is saying and Chinese statements are saying. The fact is that if Taiwan goes, the first island chain breaks. And from then on, the US and Japan are almost defenseless. So Joe Biden, if it's going to be the end of Taiwan, it is a white flag of surrender. Now look, I am sorry, but over the last more than 30 years, I have a lot of friends in the US, and over a 30-year period, I think you establish good friendships. I mean, Soren is a very dear friend of mine. Srikanth is a very dear friend of mine for very many decades. But I'd only like to say that please understand something called public opinion, which is not very important in Xi Jinping's China. And public opinion in the United States is palpable. If they feel Joe Biden is soft, well, they felt Joe Biden is soft on Taliban, and that, frankly, they want to take revenge on him. And they've humiliated him in 2 governor elections, where a favorite candidate got defeated and another favorite candidate just narrowly got elected, thanks to Joe Biden's cowardly withdrawal from Afghanistan. The silver lining there is that Biden has understood this, and I doubt that he wants to commit political harakiri. One thing Biden is, he's a political individual, 100%, not 99%. And he does not want to commit harakiri. So I can assure you that when he's fully briefed on the intent of what Xi Jinping wants, he's going to understand that possibly his stance could be misconstrued by the Chinese side. And I think you're going to see a lot of very emphatic assertions to make sure that that doesn't take place. Now, the problem for Xi is that China made economic progress only when it was close to the United States. When it was against the United States, in the period when Mao Zedong, who is the model which Xi Jinping has embraced, was all powerful. Well, Mao desperately wanted the friendship of America, but America could not decipher his very subtle language. The Chinese are amazingly subtle, and the Americans cannot be accused of being subtle. Even Ambassador Vora, who loves them very much, I love them very much, but we can't accuse them of being subtle. But the fact of the matter is, the economy tanked. And today I can tell you, you're seeing a bulge in the Chinese surplus because American companies are buying as much as they can from China while the buying is good. They know in 2 or 3 years that door is going to be shut. It's already shutting. Companies are leaving. In fact, many of them are looking at India. And hopefully, our government will get its policies right. Under Prime Minister Modi, I have high expectations of this government. A lot of that will come. But please understand the Chinese economy is no longer a rising economy. It's got unemployment rising, it's got middle class discontent, and as I said before, this is the one generation in China that is growing up now, that are teenagers, who's going to have a lower standard of life than their parents had when they were teenagers.
Okay, well.
Gauri, if you give me 30 seconds, I want to underline that.
Okay.
Me and
last 30. I'm running out of time. Last 30 seconds, yeah. Professor Singh.
Just to say, Gauri, that since you asked me how is Chinese media reading it, is how I outlined how Chinese media was reading it. But me and Nalapat have been on this program several times together, so we understand each other fairly well.
Can I intervene?
Okay. Okay, last 20 seconds, sir. Last 20 seconds.
In this conversation, Xi Jinping took a bob on Biden by saying we have to keep the domestic situation intact.
Which means Taiwan also.
But when you look at the Chinese domestic situation, $1.4 trillion has gone down the drain in the last 2 months. Fintechs, edtechs, car-hailing apps and others. Hang Seng declined by 1.4%, 2.3%. $1.4 trillion has been tanked in China. So if China wants to walk away from the US, we will probably see a lot of crashes in Shenzhen and Shanghai.
I just wanted to add, ma'am, if you permit, Joe Biden does not speak Mandarin, while Ping Pong, drunk with hubris, does not understand American English.
Okay, we are unfortunately completely out of time, gentlemen. Doesn't happen very often that we get differing views as far as China is concerned, but it's always good to have all opinions on the show. We unfortunately have to wrap it right now and slip into a very, very short break. We'll be right back.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.